But I'm very pleased to be able to welcome onto the stage Mohammed El-Kuwaiz, Vice Chairman of the Capital Market Authority, and Khalid Abdullah Hussan, CEO of Tadawul. You know who these people are. I'm not going to give a long introduction, so I'm just going to go straight into the questions. And I'm going to start with you, Mohammed. Looking at the logo of this conference, we see 2030, Vision 2030. And indeed, the whole conference has as its subtext how that vision is being delivered. Where does the CMA fit into this? What's the role of the capital market regulator in 2030?
Thank you very much, Richard. Vision 2030 is really about primarily diversifying Saudi Arabia's economy away from oil and hydrocarbon dependency. We heard the minister earlier this morning use the word de-link the finances of the government and indeed the economy from hydrocarbons. And if one starts with that as the objective, one has to start with the areas of competitive advantage for the country. Because if you want to diversify away from oil, you have to base your diversification on areas in which you have a competitive advantage. And if we do a quick scan of industries, opportunities, and sectors that can become drivers of economic growth in Saudi Arabia, then a clear outlier to us emerges as Saudi Arabia's capital market. The Saudi capital market today is the 23rd largest capital market in the world. It is the largest, without competition, capital market in the Middle East. If we compare it with our neighboring GCC countries, the Saudi capital market is larger than other GCC countries combined. Add to that the liquidity of the capital market, the diversity and the composition of its sectors and industries, that gives you a very significant source of competitive advantage. And it has been the CMA's strategy, particularly after the launch of Vision 2030 and that of our partners in the exchange, to capitalize on that competitive advantage. And the pillars that we are capitalizing on are really the goals of any capital market. The first pillar is to ease financing. Any viable capital market needs to do a good job of helping projects and viable opportunities get financing quickly and cheaply. We need to simplify the area of investment because any capital market on the other side is the destination for investment for local and international investors. And we need to make sure that that interaction happens in a platform, in an environment that is transparent, that has high governance, and that high due process and equal access to all.
Sorry, it's like being at a railway station. Thank you, Mohammed. Khalid, how do you, obviously, I know that you will echo those goals, but the CMA is the regulator. You are the exchange. What are your specific goals as regards 2030, and how do they relate to the CMA? How do you two coordinate on a strategic level how those will be delivered?
Sure. Thank you, Richard. It's always great to be here. And
it's a pleasure to have you.
I'm very excited today to speak about the capital market transformation alongside with Mohammed. So if you allow me to go back to last year event,
yes.
May 2016, CMA and Tadawul have announced their plans to first open up the market, develop the market. And of course, many people, whether they were in this room or outside that room, thought either that we are dreaming or very much optimistic. And here we are. I think every single initiative that we have talked about, both CMA and Tadawul, has been delivered and more. And that's why we are very much excited with our partners, market participants, investors, issuers, to have a real case about the Saudi market's success, about the Saudi market's integration with the international investments or international boards for investments. So all of these initiatives that has been delivered, one hasn't been delivered by the exchange alone or by the regulator alone. It's in a partnership, and without that partnership, we couldn't arrive to here with our clients and stakeholders in the market. So these initiatives achieved supporting Vision 2030 plan to make Saudi Arabia more economically diverse and competitive, as well as open the Saudi market to international investors, issuers, and financial houses.
Well, I agree, and we're going to come on to talk about some of the specifics. I'm not going to let you get away that easy, but I'd like to ask Mohammed, some of you, I think, will have been here yesterday when we did a whole morning. I was very lucky to host that on REITs. That was one of the regulations that was passed. There have now been 3 REITs issued. It took 5 months to get 3, and it took Dubai 10 years to get 2. So if that's not a development, I don't know what is. Mohammed, could you just talk to the specifics of the last 12 months? So when we were sitting here with the previous CMA, well, chairman, now minister, he talked about the initiatives. What do you see as the milestones for the CMA? And we'll talk about the future in a minute, but just remind us, from your point of view, what you have actually achieved in specific terms over the last year.
So, if you don't mind, I'll just take a step back before we talk about the details of some of the actual executions to talk about a little bit what has changed in terms of the mindset.
Sure.
Because that, I think, drives
Absolutely.
everything that has changed in the midst. We talked about earlier as part of Vision 2030 that one can really rely on the Saudi capital market as a driver of economic growth. But then a quick follow-up question would be, why has this not happened before? Why are we just realizing this now? Why are we doing this now? Why not a year, 2 years, or 10 years ago? And the reason is because until Vision 2030 and until the revision of strategies and directions that have culminated as a result in all areas, including the capital market was very much viewed as a local utility. So it was a utility for the local economy, which essentially means that the local capital market is a product to be used by local investors and by local companies and local issuers. And whenever you are constrained, as any capital market, to your internal economy, to your local investors, and to local issuers, then you are naturally constrained in terms of your growth potential, and you're also constrained in terms of your competitiveness because you're not competing for local capital, nor are you competing for local issuers. And I think that thinking is really what has changed in the past 18 to 24 months. I think there is a growing recognition that if we want to rely on the Saudi capital market as a source of competitive advantage and economic growth for the country, then we have to think as a regional exchange, as a market for the entire region, and hopefully one of the most competitive markets in the world. This essentially means opening up the 2 sides of the equation. On the first hand is opening it up to foreign investors, because you cannot become a globally competitive capital market without allowing globally competitive capital to flow in. And that has started with the QFI program, that was followed with the revisions of the QFI framework recently to lower some of the boundaries. It was then followed with the change in market infrastructure from T+0 to T+2. It also included the separation of the depository to a separate legal entity from the exchange. All of this was to make the market more accommodating, more amenable, and more accessible to investors, not just local, but international. And the other side of the equation, which we are now just starting to work on, is to make the market equally attractive for foreign issuers, whether it is issuers that would like to seek a dual listing or even a primary listing, as has been recently allowed in the NMU market.
Okay. Khalid, same question to you, and let me add a little sort of additional part of it. when we were here last year, 2030 had been announced. It was announced a few months before we came here. And it was clear amongst the senior level executives and policymakers that change in attitude to which Mohammed refers had taken place. But I think there was still perhaps a healthy degree of skepticism whether that attitude had permeated down through society and organizations. So if you could sort of talk about how that attitude and what it means for Tadawul, but in terms of the internal of the institution, have you felt that Tadawul as an entity itself has progressed beyond simply the T+2 and the NOMU and other things? Have you changed as an entity in the way that Mohammed was talking about?
Sure. I think the whole mindset, as Mohammed said, has changed nationwide. Mm-hmm. And the way people address change has been taken into a sort of a different side now. People are more flexible to change, willing to take the risk. Understanding a risk is one element. Taking the risk is something that we used to be as a culture are very conservative and taking. It's part of any business you do anywhere in the world. If you have proper plans, if you have a proper business case for such change, you shouldn't be afraid of that change. And this is basically what has been done specifically in the capital market. Putting in place proper plans, proper business case for every change we made, including working with our partners, market participants, investors, consulting them on these changes, have made us arrive to where we are today, which is we are both CMA and Tadawul are very proud of. So, if we look at that at this from the international investors' sides, it's exactly funneling up to what I just have said. Mm-hmm. The changes that we have introduced were worked very closely with every stakeholders, local and international investors, local and international market participants, to make sure that the change we make is an international practice change that is adopted in many emerging and developed market peers, well tested, people are familiar with it, regardless of what business they do, and this is where we are today. The set of changes that we introduced, specifically on the T+2 last week and the recent changes, are basically changes that people are familiar with. Changes that serve the local market and the international market. So, and that's what we believe it was a very smooth transition during the deployment. No surprises to any participants, and we will not stop here. This is just one, I would call it the latest delivery of the capital market. We'll continue to be very close to both customers or clients' demand as well as international practices.
Well, we're going to come back to it in a second, but I want to sort of re-ask the last question I asked. Khalid has talked about, and you mentioned indeed yourself, NOMU and T+2, and I talked about REITs. Are these important milestones for you, for the CMA over the last year? I mean, do you feel that you know, we started by saying, we sat here a year ago saying we were going to do things. Well, look, we've done things. And I think the establishment you know, look, we can point to concrete achievements is very, very important, because it's very easy for us to sit here on this stage and say, strategically, we need to do this. But things have changed. What's the most, you know, are there any specifics there that really signal to you that is different to how it was in the past?
When we talk about some of the main challenge, whether it's to the CMAs, to Tadawul, or to the capital market in general, like with any challenge of a new strategy and a new direction, one of the main challenges is execution. And this is not just true for the capital market, this is even more true for the entire country given the scope and magnitudes of things that are contemplated. What gives me comfort, as you've rightfully mentioned, Richard, is with respect to the capital market, that we have now, at least in as far as we've seen in the past year to year and a half, we've gone full cycle on a lot of these things. So the Numu market started off as an idea, translated into an event, has been launched. We now have the first 7 companies traded. We have 2 companies that have been approved for offering. The first day of trading on the Numu market was larger than most of the main markets in other GCC countries, which gives you an indication of the pent-up demand. We understand there are, at least by last count, about 20 signed mandates, advisory mandates for companies to offer on the Numu market. These are firms who had previously wanted access to the capital market and who didn't have access to the capital market. We have also seen it on the T+2 transition. Originally, when the plan was in pipeline, I believe the commitment from whether it's the regulator or Tadawul was that this would be implemented before the end of the first half of 2017. That was the commitment that was made. And we were actually very fortunate and very proud to have actually had a project get not only implemented, but implemented ahead of schedule. So we actually deployed it in April, which is a full 2 months before the calendar. Now, if we look forward to the next remainder of the year, I think the pipeline is not going to reduce in terms of the volume of activities and new developments at the capital market. So the first is a new set of M&A regulations. We have been notified by many, many market participants that the current set of M&A regulations may be hindering M&A activity, particularly for publicly traded firms. So the CMA has gone into almost a full rewrite of the regulations, and they're now actually in public access for public consultation. And just this morning, actually, one of my colleagues was just giving me feedback on the current draft set of M&A regulations. So we are very much welcoming the feedback during the public consultation phase. We have a set of special purpose entity regulations that we are currently working on in draft form. The purpose of these is to simplify the process of creating special purpose entities, whether it's for funds or for debt issuance, and to actually give the CMA the authority to issue full commercial registries and give them full legal entity to transact, which has been a barrier to most issuers, either of debt or asset managers. We are also working on fundamental revisions to the offering of securities regulations and the listing rules, mainly to simplify debt issuance, because again, some of the feedback that we have received is, as the market is moving more and more to debt issuance, is that the offering of securities regulations is drafted more with equities in mind.
Yep.
So we're drafting them to cater more for debt issuance. And last, but certainly not least, we're actually working on a new mechanism to collect tips from all market participants on what they suspect to be breaches with respect to the capital market law, because we understand, whether it's in the capital market in Saudi or in other markets, that's a main source of information for any potential breaches to capital market regulations.
So quite a busy to-do list. On the real estate side, I'm going to come to you in a second, Khalid. REITs are out. Those regulations are clear and they're working. Is there anything more? I mean, real estate is an asset class that is much loved by Saudis and indeed the region. The white land tax is coming in. There's changes going on in there. And of course, on the affordable housing demand, we'll be talking about that more tomorrow. So is there more to come in the real estate area, do you think, as opposed to just the more corporate? Do you want to? I was actually asking you, Mohammed, on the regulatory side, then I was going to go to the technical side.
So we actually suspect that real estate activity will hit the market or will affect the market in several ways. So the first way we are likely to see real estate activity hitting the market is with increased debt issuance. And this could be normal debt issuance of mortgage companies or even banks looking to tap the public debt market to get longer maturity assets for longer maturity liabilities for the mortgage assets that they're deploying. The second is securitization. We are likely to see more activity, not just in terms of debt issuance for mortgage companies, but mortgage companies or real estate financiers securitizing these mortgages into securities form and allowing them to be tradable in the market. And actually, some of the things we are doing, whether it's in redrafting updating the offering of securities regulations or with respect to the special purpose entity regulations, are meant to simplify that process. We also believe that and we have seen, in fact, a lot more activity in terms of real estate investment funds. Actually, we would claim that the bulk of asset gathering that we've seen over the past period has been in real estate investment funds. And then last, but certainly not least, is the most recent product that's been launched in the market, which is real estate investment trusts, which are tradable real estate investment funds that are income generating. We have seen a significant amount of interest in both the funds that have been launched to date. We have seen massive subscriptions to the fund that have been recently closed, and we continue to see a healthy pipeline of applicants currently moving into the process. So we think we will be beating our neighbors quite handily in terms of the number of listings and the volume of trading, which is probably more important to establish liquidity of an instrument.
Thank you. So, I mean, as I said, there's a cross-sector raft of legislation and regulations, sorry, not legislation, regulations coming. Khalid, on the more technical side, we talked a little bit about T+2. Do by all means talk about that and what you feel it will do for the market. But what's the future from Tadawul's side? You and I on stages around the world and in other places have talked about MSCI. We've talked about all sorts of things. You've achieved, as the CMA has, some very significant milestones in the last 12 months. When we're sitting again here, inshallah, next year, what will we be congratulating you about then? So what's in your pipeline?
Well, as I said, the latest development was what we have launched around T+2. We'll continue to make or achieve the objective of that change locally and internationally. We have been very close to international investors through several roadshows in US, Europe, and Asia. We'll continue the outreach plan to attract more institutional investors to participate in our market. That on the side of opening up the market, and hopefully as another milestone, joining emerging market indices, which is we have been working very closely with my colleagues, and MSCI are here, so I should be very careful on what I say. But we have been working with the full transparency with everyone. Talking about the change, it's about international feedback now on these changes, and hopefully they will be positive.
Can I push you on a sort of? I don't want to be rude and ask you for a date when MSCI might happen, but there must be a sort of timetable in your mind about that journey. Because we know it started a number of years ago. Do you feel still confident that that's a sort of 2 to 5 year plan, or is it a little hard to say at the moment?
I hope the decision is within me, and it's very hard to say I'm confident with the decision being somewhere else. What I can say, I'm positive, I'm optimistic about what we have done, because we have done it with a close relationship with international investors and indices providers. So I will keep the relationship very close and hopefully achieve the objective of that. On the other fold of what are the plans, CMA and Tadawul have aligned on plan for until 2020. And this is one of the most important bases that we have worked on to understand the priorities, what comes first, focus the execution and the developments on these plans. So I'm very comfortable that we will have very productive 2.5 years coming. One thing I want to mention that we will be doing this year is the setup of the clearinghouse in Saudi Arabia, which is going to be one of the key milestones on clearing cash and derivatives in the future. It's one of the fundamentals of any developed market, and we are pursuing that plan this year.
So the clearinghouse is one of the things that should happen during the course of the next 12 months, all things being equal.
Hopefully.
I'm just waiting notes, so when I sit here in a year's time, I can ask you.
As am I.
Mohammed is too, so you didn't know we were going to do this. Let's move away a little bit from the specifics and look at some of the other but vitally important issues. And Mohammed, I direct the first question to you of this. It's clear that there is a momentum of development within the Saudi capital markets. However, in the past in the kingdom, it is still a retail market. There have been moments, times, I mean, I certainly can remember them, I'm sure you will, where certainly elements of the market were not perhaps fully cognizant of what it was they were trading, what it was they were buying. So financial education in that sense is a critical part of the development of a more mature market. And I'm not just saying educating the man in the street, I'm talking about something more strategic, but also from the development of the local institutional investor market, to get them comfortable to be able to evaluate risk positions in assets which they haven't previously, like debt, like local debt, like derivatives, like REITs, all of these different things. What's the CMA's approach to that? I mean, how do you gauge whether a market has the ability to judge properly of the relative risk and value of a particular investment?
So that's a great question, Richard. And in all honesty, this is probably the question that the CMA's team and the CMA's board spends the most significant time on each individual issue. The two comments that I would like to make is that one always views market development and protecting investors as a kind of polarity, as a polar opposite, as an either-or situation. And I think one of the big changes that has been happening in terms of mindset in the CMA is that these are only polar opposites if you're thinking in the short term. If you're thinking in the long term for the capital markets, then it's an and situation, not an or situation. Then you need to promote market development and protect investors. You cannot do one at the expense of the other, because if you solely protect market investors, that is your sole purpose, and you are not conscious at all about the level of liquidity in the market, the level of development in the market, then the market will die and the market will become illiquid, and that will ultimately be to the detriment of investors because they cannot exit positions, they cannot enter positions, pricing will be inefficient. And the other way around, if we say we would like to develop the market without concern for investor protection, then all it takes is a series of disasters or missteps for the market to lose credibility, and it's very difficult to achieve development in that regard. And so it is a delicate balancing act, but it is very much a balancing act, not a contradiction, particularly if you look in the longer term. And I wish I could say that there was a single rule for it. No. I believe the rule changes and the judgment changes from instance to instance. Maybe the most recent example of this was the example we've had with respect to the Numu market. There have been significant calls, and it has been abundantly clear that the market needs access to public capital, particularly small and medium businesses, faster growing businesses that may not be able to afford, or maybe even not willing to willing to access the main market. So the need was quite clear. But that was very much confronted with the same problem, which is, but at the same time, you can't open it up to all investors because we know the retail orientation. The final decision that was reached was a medium solution, which is essentially to go ahead and launch the market but at the same time to make it accessible to a specific class of investors. And that class of investors, in terms of definition, was the one that I think spent the longest time, and we had the largest degree of interaction with the public at large. It was originally a set of criteria. The public, I think, gave us feedback, and one of the biggest elements of feedback was that the selection criteria for being able to access the Numu market was no longer a constraint of size, because it was very important for us that it not be limited to high net worth investors, because that was viewed as unfair. So one criteria that was added then was to make it a purely merit-based access criteria, which is to have a CMA certification, which is an exam that the CMA gives to establish a minimum level of access. So that allows you to achieve both market development, but at the same time ensure equal access to all.
Khalid, I know that Tadawul over the years has been involved with the nitty-gritty of investor education and all of that. But where do you now sit? I mean, the products that are coming in, the things that you're doing, really are going to be more towards the institutional, professional end of the spectrum. I mean, we would hope. I mean, I think, retail speculation on derivatives anywhere in the world, probably a dangerous thing. In my mind, they probably deserve to lose their money. But, this is the institutionalization of the market. But two things. How do you bring along the vast numbers of people within the kingdom who are actively engaged as individuals with Tadawul and with Tasty and the indexes and all of that, as well as making sure that the institutions, the pension funds, the foundations, the other funds that are there are there as well. How do you balance those two priorities, and what are you doing to make sure that the market understands the new things that you're doing?
Well, as you rightly said, Richard, we have to balance between our retail investors, education, and as Mohammed covered that well, and how do we reach our institutional investors on these changes. So what has happened on the institutional side, basically, we're doing things differently. We're engaging best PR agencies to make sure that all of our messages, locally and internationally, arrives to the right destinations. We're using different news wires to also distribute our channels. But most importantly, especially for the international institutions, we are capitalizing a lot on the international APs that participate here. So through them, we do lots of one-to-one meeting, conferences, all over the places. And this is one of the most productive channel to outreach the institutional investors that we have learned its effectiveness in the last 12 months.
Staying with you, I have two more questions as we're sort of coming towards the end of our session. We have 5 or 6 minutes left. If we were sitting anywhere in the world, I would be asking you this question. I may have asked it slightly higher up the list, but and I'm going to come to you, Mohammed, specifically as well, but fintech, which to me is a very vague term, and we're going to have a discussion about that this afternoon. But, it's the buzzword. Everyone's talking fintech. Trading, capital markets, perhaps less than things like payments, but it's still important. Where does the exchange, where does Tadawul sit on the deployment of new technology and innovations? Are you actively working with innovators, or are you looking at deploying best practice? How do you fit with that type of thing?
Well, it's about priorities. So what we have been focused on the last few months is basically infrastructural changes, and that includes technology. In September 2015, we have changed our trading platform using one of the most effective and powerful trading engines. We are in the process now of replacing our back office technology, which is basically going to enlarge, cover many of the latest technology. That's on the core business of the exchange. However, We think as an exchange, and as many other exchanges, can do a lot around technology, because we are very strong in technology. We
Yes,
have
you always
several
have been.
partners, and this is an area within our strategy and business plan to focus on how could we, using our capability, introduce more innovative tools to the market, to the services we provide, whether through technology services or data and indices, which are areas that we're exploring as we speak.
Mohammed, in the UK and now indeed elsewhere, the regulators have these things called regulatory sandboxes, particularly the FCA, where fintech companies can, I mean, I'm not going to go into the details of how they work, I'm sure you know, but essentially they can experiment in a safe environment what the impact of their new technology means to a market. Could be RegTech, could be blockchain, which rather surprisingly Chris has mentioned 3 times this morning already, given that he still doesn't know what it is. You know, all of these things, they are becoming more and more important. But the regulator has got to ensure that they add value, they are contribute, they don't destabilize the system, and other things. How does the CMA approach that new technology, new approach, you know, which is being applied to capital markets?
So the most innovations generally abhor regulation. That's true for not just in Saudi, but everywhere in the world. And in fintech, I think it's no exception. And I believe it's not because it necessarily is designed to breach the law, but regulations are designed with a specific set of needs in mind. And new innovations oftentimes cater to different needs, and the two may not necessarily go in sync. And we increasingly recognize, as the capital market regulators, that our regulations will not fit every single instance, scenario, and business case. And what we've tried to do to accommodate that from the outset is to say to most market participants, if you have a circumstance, if you have a specific instance that has a business and economic merit, which the local regulations do not necessarily serve, then we are always accommodating to revisit that, whether it's to revisit it for that single instance or to revisit the entire set of regulations if there's a broader need for it. We are now actually working on an institutionalization of that approach. So rather than doing it on a one-to-one basis, that it's done at an institutional, almost regulatory sandbox like fashion, where specific types of businesses can apply to the CMA, and then under specific rules with specific mandates, they can conduct their operation under the watchful eye of the regulator until they have a proof of concept. We are working on something, our colleagues in the central bank and SAMA are working on something similar, and we are continuously comparing notes with how best to deal with this. And we're hoping to launch and announce something quite soon.
Well, it's a fascinating topic, and I encourage all of you to come to our session on it this afternoon, where I shall struggle manfully to understand what it is we're talking about. One issue, one big potential event in the future that we touched on this morning. Now, I'm not asking you to predict if it will happen. I think you know where I'm going with this, or when, or in what form, because that would be something I know you wouldn't do. But the Aramco IPO and associated IPOs, and I just want to know that the CMA and Tadawul, you must be involved somehow with that process to ensure that when it comes to market, and I think it is a when rather than an if, it doesn't over-dominate or create unexpected consequences. Are you involved? Are you involved in that process? Are you part of the conversations on how that will be integrated into the Saudi market? I'm asking you first, Mohammed, and then I'm asking Khalid, and then I have one final question for each of you.
So So the CMA, in terms of its structure, is an independent regulator and has tried, and always hopefully successfully, to remain an independent regulator. We are independent by mandate, we are independent by governance, and the purpose of this independence is to approach any listing or any offering of securities in the same manner and with the same requirements and following the same due process and protecting the same investors, whether the issuer is a private entity or a government institution. And I think we have tried to follow the same process with respect to any privatization, including the impending Saudi Aramco IPO. We apply the same rules, we apply the same regulations, and our belief is that the rules and regulations in place are fully in force to allow for the Saudi Aramco IPO or any other IPO. As with any other flotation, there are usually continuous discussions with both the regulator and the exchange to answer questions, to help with specific issues, and we usually make ourselves available to any potential issuer who has specific questions that they'd like to address. So we don't believe that from a regulator standpoint that a major change or modification needs to be made in terms of regulations or market infrastructure to accommodate
or indeed to your individual process as the CMA.
The offering is the same. I'm curious to hear the response of my colleagues in the exchange, because I'm sure they have different issues that they're dealing with with respect to whether it's liquidity or linkages.
Thank you. Basically, as an exchange, and as any other exchange, with a listing of a size of Aramco, there are many questions to be answered. And as Mohammed said, liquidities, capacities, coverage, all of these. So I think until we have all of these detailed issued by Aramco, we would comment on the Saudi Stock Exchange position as far as how would that decision impact the exchange itself and its operation. But in general terms, I would use the same, as Mohammed said, as an exchange, as a listing venue. There are a set of things that you look at as a listing requirements. It will be looked at with Aramco and any other issue.
So my final question, and it's a personal one to both of you. And I'll start with Khalid and then come to Mohammed. As the leader, or de facto leaders of the two of the critical institutions within the capital markets, what do you think is what keeps you going? What excites you about your job? What gets you up in the morning?
Okay, that's a very interesting question.
First, within 5 minutes.
Well, 5 minutes, that's too long, I guess. First, I think the window of opportunities today that is flexible and open by the government, by the cooperation of private and public sectors, is just tells everyone that it's just a simple window. If we don't take it, somebody else will jump and take it. That's one side. The second is basically from the exchange perspective. I think the Saudi capital market is not well positioned today as far as its size and contribution to the Saudi economy first. So we want to reach the right position and contribution of the Saudi capital market compared to our GDP. We represent 65% of that today. We would reach a much better percentage of that. Second, have I would use Tadawul logo in the exchange word map.
Yep.
And that's by itself, it's a very important milestone for us. We are the biggest, as earlier said by Mohammed, we are the biggest in the region. We're the 10th largest emerging market in the world. We are among the top 23 exchanges in the world. So we deserve to be on that map, and we're making all efforts to be there, and I think we have started. and we will celebrate.
If I could précis what you said, is one of the things that enthuses you about what you do, the fact that you feel part of something bigger and of national importance that's going to make a real difference to the country. Is that, I mean, is that fair to say?
What was it?
I said that you feel part of something bigger.
Exactly.
It's not just running an exchange, like, you know, the London Stock Exchange people, correct, but you're part of something bigger than that. You're part of a national process.
Of course, we are in the heart of a national process. We want to put our fingerprints as a capital market overall, including everybody in there, on that delivery. We're very supportive of the NTP and Vision 2030. And all of that, honestly, by the end of the day, arrives to also achieving a better stand for the Saudi capital market itself. So it's a mutual cooperation and achievements by both the country as well as the Saudi market being one of the drivers there.
Mohammed, I mean, I'm going to just put a little, it's the same question, but with a little sort of teasy bit on the end of it, because of course I knew you prior to you being a regulator, and you are, and I mean this as as a compliment, one of the most private sector people I know. You know, your psychology has been in finance and business. So what is it that interests you and excites you about your role at the CMA, and how have you made the transition from being a private sector person to being a regulator? I mean, it is a bit of a psychological difference.
Well, maybe if I can start with a brief story, again in under 4 minutes.
Please, otherwise I'll be shot by Victoria.
My father, who worked for the government for almost the entirety of his life, gave me one piece of career advice when I was just about to graduate from college. And I said, you know, do you have any career advice for me? And he gave me one piece of career advice. And the career advice he gave me at the time was, don't work for the government. And when I said, why? He said, and again, this is a long time ago, but he said, because the government service is where dreamers die, is where dreams die. And I took that to heart, and I followed his advice for the vast majority of my professional career, and I would like to admit quite happily so. And I could very much see the rationale, looking at the experience of a lot of my colleagues, people I know in the public sector. I could see that throughout my career. So it was natural that when I changed my mind and I moved into the public sector, the first calls I received was a call from my father, who was angry and unhappy that I had not followed his advice after so many successful years. And he asked me the same question, why? And the reason I said, which is the reason I believe today, which is the same reason that excites me to get up in the morning, is because I truly believe, and I have started to see, that it is in fact different. We see a level of enthusiasm, we see a level of commitment, we see a level of discipline, and we see a level of decisiveness that I have not encountered in my adult life. And that level of discipline, that level of excitement, is what truly makes you enthusiastic to be part of a bigger thing. You believe that we are trying to all work on a much bigger idea, a much bigger vision that is part of all of us. Not to say that in the past it wasn't attempted, but in the past it was always an individual affair. You had an individual person, a lone contributor, who was essentially working against the system. This is the first time that I've seen it where all cylinders are firing in the same direction. Whenever you have a large machine like the Saudi government or the Saudi economy, it will never fire perfectly, but they are tuning up quite nicely, much more than I've seen at any previous period. And that is actually quite excited, and that's what gets me up every morning.
Well, that's a wonderful note on which... well, I think that says everything. I'm going to ask you to clap again. We're going to move on. We have a speech and then an interview and then a final panel before lunch. We will try and get that in within an hour and 10 minutes, hour and 15 minutes, not too late anymore. So please join me in thanking Mohammed El-Kuwaiz and Khalid Abdullah Al-Hussan. Um,